And here's the thing about acknowledging reality, it doesn't just benefit the individual, it benefits the entire team. When you're honest about challenges, when you allow yourself to say, hey, this is a rough patch, but we're in it together, you're building a culture of transparency. And transparency leads to trust. Think about it. If people in your organization feel they can bring up real issues, if they feel they can be honest about what they're struggling with, they're much more likely to communicate openly. That's when you start to see real teamwork. That's when people start to cover each other's blind spots, share insights, bring up ideas that might have been buried if they didn't feel safe. But it all starts with us as leaders being willing to open that door. Now, let's talk about why it's so tempting to jump to positivity. When we see someone struggling, a part of us wants to solve it. It's uncomfortable to sit with someone else's pain or stress. It's almost a reflex to say, hey, it'll be okay, don't worry, but that urge to fix things immediately is more about making ourselves comfortable, not necessarily helping the other person. In fact, sometimes our need to fix can make things worse. Let me ask you this, have you ever tried to help someone by telling them to look on the bright side, only to have them pull away or shut down? That's because they didn't need you to fix their feelings. They needed you to sit with them in their feelings. There's a profound difference between listening to someone with empathy and jumping in with solutions. Empathy says, I understand. I'm here, solutions say, here's what you should do, which implies your feelings are a problem that needs fixing. We have to recognize that emotions, especially difficult ones, aren't problems. They're signals. And they're natural responses to our environment, and they deserve to be respected. So the next time you feel that urge to fix or solve, pause. Just pause and listen. Instead of offering solutions, try saying something like, I hear you. That sounds really tough. I'm here if you need anything. That one simple response has so much power. It's a way of saying, I see you, and I respect where you are right now. When we lead this way, we're building resilience. Resilience doesn't come from pretending everything's fine. It comes from acknowledging challenges and finding the strength to face them head on. It's about saying, yes, this is hard, but we can get through it together. And when people experience that kind of genuine support, it's amazing how capable they become. They don't need to be told to stay positive. They feel empowered to do their best because they know they're not alone. Let's look at it from another angle. Think about a time when you felt overwhelmed at work. Maybe a deadline was looming or a project was falling apart. And let's say you reached out to a leader for support. Now imagine if that leader had looked at you and said, everything's fine, just keep a positive mindset. How would that feel? Would it motivate you or would it make you feel unseen? Contrast that with a leader who says, wow, that sounds really challenging. Let's talk through it. What's been the most difficult part? That second response doesn't fix the situation, but it acknowledges it. And in that acknowledgement, there's respect, there's trust, there's understanding. That's what people need to feel if we want them to keep going. But this kind of leadership requires vulnerability from us. It requires us to be okay with uncertainty, to be okay with not having all the answers. And that's hard because we've been taught to associate leadership with strength, with control, with knowing what to do at all times. But real strength in leadership is the courage to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here with you and we'll figure this out. When we give people space to express themselves without judgment, we're not only helping them cope, but we're also learning. We're gaining insights into the true dynamics of our team, understanding the underlying issues, and finding ways to address them effectively. It's like shining a light into the shadows, uncovering things that would otherwise stay hidden. And I know for some of us, it feels counterintuitive. We might think, if I acknowledge that things are difficult, won't that demoralize the team? But here's the truth people know when things are hard. They're already feeling it. Ignoring reality doesn't make it go away, it just leaves people to deal with it alone. By acknowledging it openly, we're saying, I'm here to support you through this. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. And when we lead with that mindset, we create an environment where people feel safe to be honest, to ask for help, to make mistakes, and to grow from them. We create a culture where resilience is built, not by forcing positivity, but by embracing reality and facing it together. So let's commit to being the kind of leaders who listen more than we talk, who understand more than we judge, and who support more than we critique. Let's create spaces where people feel they can be themselves, even on their hardest days. Because that's when people feel inspired to bring their best selves to work, not because they're being forced to stay positive, but because they feel genuinely supported. We have a choice every day. We can either build walls of positivity that shut people out, or we can open doors of empathy that invite people in. And when we choose the latter, we're not only leading with compassion, but we're also building a stronger, more resilient, more connected team. Let's be honest with ourselves and with each other. Let's say, yes, there will be hard days, but I'm here with you. We'll get through it together. And that's how we lead without toxic positivity. That's how we build trust. That's how we inspire. That's how we create workplaces where people aren't just surviving, but truly thriving. Encourage open dialogue. This is one of the most important principles when it comes to combating the dangerous effects of toxic positivity in our workplaces and communities. Why? Because when we shy away from honest conversations, when we pretend that everything is fine or try to paper over real concerns with platitudes, we aren't actually helping anyone. We're doing the opposite. We're stifling the voices that need to be heard. And when those voices are silenced, real issues fester, morale drops, trust erodes, and everyone suffers in the end. Imagine for a moment a workplace where people feel they can't share how they really feel because they're afraid they'll be met with just think positive or stay optimistic. These statements, though meant to reassure, ultimately lead to feelings of isolation and disconnection. Because when we're not allowed to be honest about what's difficult, what's challenging, what's frustrating, we're left with no real place to turn. We feel unseen and unheard, as if our feelings don't matter. So what do we do instead? We say nothing. We bottle it up. And that's a dangerous place to be. Encouraging open dialogue means creating an environment where people feel safe to speak freely, where they can express concerns, ask questions, and challenge ideas without fear of judgment or dismissal. It's about letting people be real, even if what they have to say isn't always comfortable to hear. This doesn't mean we're abandoning positivity. It means we're recognizing that positivity isn't about ignoring what's wrong, but about addressing it in a constructive way. Let's consider a practical scenario. Let's say someone on your team is struggling with a project, and they express feelings of frustration and doubt. Now, you might be tempted to respond with something like, "Don't worry, it'll all work out," or "Stay positive. You've got this," but what's the real impact of that? Well, it tells them that their feelings are secondary, that their genuine concerns are less important than maintaining a facade of cheerfulness. In contrast, if you encourage open dialogue, you might say, "Tell me more about what's been difficult for you. Let's talk it through together." That small shift makes a world of difference. It allows them to feel supported without dismissing their struggle. When we avoid toxic positivity and instead make space for open dialogue, we're saying to our teams and our colleagues, "I see you, I hear you, and I'm here with you." We're not pretending that everything is perfect. We're acknowledging the imperfections and working through them together. And that's where true positivity and resilience come from. It's about building a culture where people know they're not alone in their challenges, where they feel empowered to bring their whole selves to the table. So how do we go about encouraging this open dialogue? It starts with listening, really listening. So often we're quick to jump in with advice or reassurance before we've even heard the full extent of someone's concern. But when we do this, we're not actually engaging in dialogue. We're just offering quick fixes that may not address the root of the issue. Instead, we need to make a conscious effort to listen fully, to allow people to express themselves without interruption or judgment. When someone feels truly heard, they feel valued. They feel respected. And that's the foundation for a strong, connected team. Another critical aspect of encouraging open dialogue is creating an atmosphere where mistakes and setbacks are seen as opportunities for growth rather than things to be swept under the rug. When people know they can be honest about their struggles without fear of reprimand, they're far more likely to come forward, to seek help when they need it, and to learn from their experiences. But if they feel that any admission of difficulty will be met with an insistence on staying positive, they'll hide their struggles. And when we hide our struggles, we miss out on the chance to grow. So instead of forcing positivity, let's embrace vulnerability. Let's make it okay for people to say, "I'm struggling" or "I'm feeling uncertain," because the truth is, we all have moments like that. We're all human, and we all face challenges. When we acknowledge this reality, we create a more compassionate and resilient workplace. And when we approach those moments with empathy, when we meet them with an open mind and a willingness to understand, we foster a culture where people feel genuinely supported, not just superficially encouraged. This approach isn't about focusing on the negative or dwelling on problems. It's about creating a balance. It's about recognizing that real positivity comes from addressing both the highs and the lows. It's about building a culture of honesty and transparency where people feel safe to speak up, even when what they have to say isn't easy. Imagine a workplace where people feel comfortable sharing their thoughts without fearing they'll be labeled as negative or pessimistic. That's a workplace where people can grow, where they can innovate, where they can tackle problems head on. It's a place where real, sustainable positivity thrives because it's rooted in authenticity. That's what we're aiming for. So let's encourage open dialogue, not just as a strategy, but as a core value. Let's build teams that understand that honesty and openness are strengths, not weaknesses. Let's create workplaces where people feel seen and heard, where they know that they can bring their true selves to work every day. And let's remember that true leadership isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about facing challenges with courage, empathy, and a commitment to finding real solutions together. Balance optimism with realism. I cannot stress how critical this idea is, especially in today's world where positivity is all around us and we hear it constantly, just stay positive, everything's going to be okay, look on the bright side now. I'm not saying positivity isn't valuable. We need optimism to keep us motivated and inspired. But when positivity is applied without realism, without acknowledging the truth of a situation, it becomes a problem. It becomes toxic. Here's the issue: when we lean too far into positivity, without facing the real circumstances around us, we end up in denial. We're lying to ourselves and we're lying to the people who trust us. And let me tell you, people are smart. They know when things are off. They know when we're not being honest with them. So when we act as if everything is fine when it isn't, we erode trust. Our teams, our communities, and even we ourselves become disillusioned because that blind optimism doesn't feel true. And if it doesn't feel true, it won't hold up over time. Let's consider this. Imagine you're in a tough spot at work. Maybe there's a big project and you know you're behind on the deadline. You're worried. Your team is worried. Now, if a leader comes in and just says, don't worry, everything's good, without acknowledging the actual concerns, what happens? They lose credibility. The people they're speaking to can see the disconnect. They know the reality, and they're watching that leader act as if it doesn't exist. This disconnect makes people feel alone in their worry, and it makes them question their trust in leadership. Balancing optimism with realism is not about being negative, it's about being honest. It's about acknowledging, yes, this is tough, but I believe we can get through it together. It's about saying, I understand your concerns, and here's what we're going to do about them. See, realism doesn't kill hope. In fact, it makes hope stronger because it's grounded in truth. People want to know that we're facing challenges head on and that we're working towards solutions. We have to understand that people don't follow blindly. They follow people who they believe see them, understand them, and are honest with them. People want to be inspired, yes, but they also want to know that the person inspiring them is aware of the whole picture. And if we deny reality, we're not leading, we're just reciting empty phrases. And look, there's a difference between being optimistic and being blind. Optimism is saying, I know this is tough, but I believe we can handle it. Blind positivity says, there's nothing to worry about, everything's perfect. Do you see the difference? One approach acknowledges the challenge and instills hope, while the other dismisses the challenge altogether. We all know which approach feels authentic and which one feels shallow. Model resilience, not perfection. When we say that, what does it really mean? It means we as leaders have a responsibility to show up in a way that says, I don't have all the answers, I don't have it all together all the time, but I'm here and I'm committed to learning, to growing, to being honest about my mistakes. That's resilience. Perfection, it's a mirage, a fantasy that no one can actually live up to. And the more we chase it, the more we end up pushing ourselves and our teams into burnout, frustration, and eventually a lack of trust. Why does this matter? Because people, our teams, our colleagues, those around us don't need perfect leaders. They need real leaders. And real leaders are resilient, not because they avoid failure, but because they can embrace it, learn from it, and keep moving forward. Resilience is not about pretending that everything is fine or insisting on a positive outlook when things are genuinely difficult. That's what I call toxic positivity. And it is a real danger in leadership. And toxic positivity is the pressure we feel to look on the bright side all the time, to dismiss struggles with a smile, to brush aside real issues with phrases like, just think positive. It's dangerous because it discourages people from expressing their genuine concerns, from being honest about their challenges. It creates an environment where vulnerability is seen as weakness instead of the powerful strength that it actually is. What we need then is not a culture of perfection, but a culture of resilience. And that culture starts with you as the leader. Your team doesn't need you to be flawless. They need to know you are human. They need to know that it's okay to struggle, that it's okay to ask for help, and that it's okay to fail. And they will only know that if you show them, if you model it yourself. Imagine you have a team member who's facing a challenging project and they're overwhelmed. Now, if you come in with toxic positivity and tell them, just keep smiling, It'll all work out. They're likely to feel more isolated, even dismissed. It's like telling someone who's struggling to swim in a stormy sea, just think dry thoughts, it's not helpful, and it doesn't address the reality of the situation. Instead, what if you walked alongside them in that moment and said, this is tough, I know. I've been there too, and I know how overwhelming it can feel. But let's break it down together and see how we can tackle it step by step. You acknowledge the struggle you share in their experience, and you work together to find a way through. That's resilience in action. And here's the truth: people don't connect to us because we're perfect. They connect to us because we're real. When we, as leaders, show our own vulnerability, our own struggles, and how we navigate them, it gives permission for others to do the same. It creates a safe space where people don't have to hide their challenges, where they can admit when they're struggling and where they know they won't be met with empty platitudes. And that's a powerful environment for growth, for innovation, and for trust. I've seen this time and time again. A leader who insists on perfection sets up a standard that no one can live up to, not even themselves. And in that environment, people become afraid. Afraid to take risks, afraid to speak up, afraid to admit mistakes. They're constantly worried about how they're being perceived if they're doing things right, but a leader who models resilience. That leader creates a space where people can try new things, make mistakes, and know that they're not going to be punished or shamed for it. They're going to be supported, they're going to be encouraged, they're going to be guided through the process of learning and growing. Let's talk about what happens when we, as leaders, don't model resilience. When we try to portray ourselves as flawless, we create an invisible wall between ourselves and our teams. I think about it, if your team sees you as this untouchable figure who always has it together, how comfortable do you think they'll feel coming to you with their own struggles? If they think you never make mistakes, why would they feel safe admitting their own? We have to be willing to show up in a way that says, I make mistakes too. I have days where I feel uncertain, but I'm here, I'm committed, and I'm not giving up. That's what connects us. And that's what builds a culture of trust. And trust me, this isn't easy. It takes real courage to admit when you don't have it all together. But in that moment, when you own up to a mistake, when you share a struggle, you give others the courage to do the same. You create a ripple effect, a culture where people feel safe to be themselves, to take risks, to be honest about where they are. And in that kind of culture, resilience becomes the norm because people are constantly learning and growing together instead of hiding their struggles and pretending everything is fine. When you're a resilient leader, you don't avoid failure, you embrace it as part of the journey. You show your team that setbacks are not the end of the road, but a part of the learning process. You teach them that mistakes are opportunities for growth, and that resilience is not about being perfect, but about getting back up again and again. That's what people need to see in their leaders. Not someone who's never fallen, but someone who knows how to stand back up. Let's break this down a bit more. Resilience means being willing to try new things, even if you don't have all the answers. It means admitting when you're unsure, when you're uncomfortable, and when you're in over your head. Because when you do that, you're showing your team that it's okay not to know everything. It's okay to be a beginner, to make mistakes, to learn. That's where real growth happens, and that's what fosters a strong, connected, and resilient team. So when you find yourself facing a difficult situation, remember, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all together. What matters is that you're willing to keep moving forward, to keep learning, and to keep showing up. Because in the end, that's what resilience is all about. It's not about never falling. It's about being willing to rise every single time you do. And when you model that for your team, you give them the courage to do the same. And let's be clear, this doesn't mean ignoring the positive. I'm not saying that we should dwell on negativity or that we shouldn't encourage our teams to stay hopeful, but hope and resilience are not the same as toxic positivity. Hope says, I believe we can get through this. Even though it's hard, toxic positivity says, don't worry, everything's fine, even when it isn't. Celebrate efforts, not outcomes. We live in a culture that constantly celebrates winning, that puts a spotlight on the final result, on that perfect score, on that big promotion, on that success story we see in the headlines. But what about the effort? What about the journey? What about the grit, the late nights, the failures that no one saw? What about the tenacity it took just to keep going when things were tough? Too often, we skip over those parts and rush straight to the outcome. Here's the thing: when we only celebrate outcomes, we send a dangerous message. We start to tell people that their value is only as great as their achievements. But effort is where growth happens. Effort is where learning happens. Effort is where resilience is built. When we celebrate effort, we're celebrating the things that make us stronger, better, and more capable in the long run. When we only celebrate outcomes, we make it seem like the journey doesn't matter. And that's a lot. Let me ask you this. Have you ever been part of a team where everyone was afraid to fail? Where everyone was so focused on hitting a target that nobody wanted to take a risk? Or maybe they didn't even want to bring up a problem because they thought they'd look like they were struggling. That's what happens when we only celebrate outcomes. People get scared, they hide the messy parts, they hide the real work that goes into growing. But when we celebrate effort, we make it okay to be human. We make it okay to learn as we go. And that's where real progress starts. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with being proud of your achievements, of course. But the problem is when we start to place all our worth and all our happiness in that final goal. You see, if you only feel good when you win, then you're in for a hard time. Because here's the truth, even the most successful people, even those who seem to win all the time, fail, they struggle, they have setbacks. The difference is that they don't measure themselves only by those outcomes. They measure themselves by the growth they've achieved along the way. And so should we. Think about it this way. Let's say you're leading a team and one of your team members is working on a really big project. They're pouring their heart and soul into it. They're up late. They're learning new things. They're solving problems as they go. But when the final day comes, they don't hit the goal exactly as they'd hoped. Now, if we only celebrate outcomes, we'd say, oh, that's too bad and move on. But if we celebrate effort, we say, wow, look at everything you learned. Look at the perseverance you showed. Look at all the skills you built along the way, and that matters. Because that's the kind of experience that makes people want to keep going, to keep trying, and to keep trying, and to keep growing. It's like climbing a mountain. We could stand at the top and say, look at this view, this is what matters, but what good would that be if we ignored the climb? If we forgot the moments where we had to take a break, where we had to find another route, where we stumbled, fell, got up, and kept moving, the view from the top is great, but the climb, that's where we find out what we're made of. That's where we learn. And if we don't celebrate that climb, then what are we really celebrating? And here's another thing that happens when we only focus on outcomes. We create this thing called toxic positivity. You've probably heard that phrase before, right? Toxic positivity is that relentless, everything's fine, everything's amazing, just be happy mentality. It's when we try to force positivity onto every situation, even when things are hard. And toxic positivity, it's a trap. It sounds good on the surface, but it's actually dangerous. Why? Because when we're constantly saying just stay positive, we're ignoring the reality that sometimes things are hard. Sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes people need space to be honest about what they're feeling. But when we push that aside, we're telling people to hide their struggles. We're telling them it's not okay to be anything but positive. And that just builds pressure. It makes people feel alone. It makes them feel like they can't share what they're going through. And that's not healthy. In fact, I'd say one of the most powerful things we can do as leaders, as teammates, and even just as friends, is to create an environment where people feel safe to be real. Where they feel comfortable saying, I'm struggling with this, or I'm not sure if I can do this, or I made a mistake. Because when people feel that safety, they can be honest about their journey. And when they're honest, they can grow, they can learn, they can make real progress. But when they're hiding behind a mask of toxic positivity, they're not growing, or they're just pretending. I think about it this way: if we want to build strong teams, strong relationships, and strong cultures, we need to give people the freedom to be human. We need to show them that their worth isn't just in the outcome, it's in the journey, in the effort, in the heart they put into what they do. We need to remind them that they don't have to be perfect, they just have to be willing to try, to learn, and to keep going. Celebrating effort means saying, hey, I see the work you're putting in, I see how hard you're trying. And that matters. It means recognizing the late nights, the extra hours, the times they didn't give up, even when things were tough. And that matters too. Because when we celebrate effort, we're giving people permission to be human. We're giving them permission to take risks, to fail, and to get back up again. And that's how real success is built. It's built on a foundation of effort, resilience, and growth, not just on the end result. So let's stop focusing so much on outcomes and let's start celebrating the journey. Let's start celebrating the people who put in the work, who show up every day, who push through the challenges. Let's start celebrating the climbers, not just the people who reach the summit. Because in the end, it's not just about where we end up, it's about how we get there. And when we celebrate that, we build stronger people, stronger teams, and stronger futures. Train your team to tackle adversity. What that really means. Because we throw the word adversity around a lot, don't we? And when it comes to our teams, we think, hey, we've got a positive culture. We're optimistic, we're motivating, but here's the reality: adversity doesn't care how positive your culture is. It doesn't care how upbeat your attitude is. It's not deterred by a smile or a can-do attitude. Adversity shows up unannounced, uninvited, and sometimes at the worst possible times. And if all we've done as leaders is shield our teams from it, if all we've done is tell them everything's fine, don't worry, just keep positive, then we've done them a disservice. We've left them vulnerable, unprepared, and potentially at risk. Now, why is that? Why would well-meaning positivity be a problem? It's because there's a difference between optimism and delusion. Optimism acknowledges reality, it doesn't pretend challenges aren't there. True optimism says, yes, this is hard. Yes, this may not be what we planned for, but we're going to face it head on. Together, on the other hand, toxic positivity insists on silver linings to the point where it disregards the cloud. It refuses to see what's uncomfortable or difficult because it's easier to just say, stay positive, but when we tell people to stay positive without equipping them to handle adversity, we're setting them up for failure. Imagine this: you've got a new hire, they're motivated, full of energy, and they're all in on the mission, but then they hit their first major challenge. Maybe it's a difficult client, maybe it's a project that goes off the rails, and they come to you unsure, shaken. They're looking for guidance. And if all you say is keep your head up, just focus on the positives, what does that do? It might lift their spirits in the short term, but it does nothing to equip them for the long haul. They're left to figure it out on their own. They're left with a sense of failure, a sense that maybe they're just not cut out for this, when in reality, they just haven't been trained to handle adversity. Training a team to handle adversity is not about telling them to keep a positive mindset. It's about teaching them how to respond when things go wrong. It's about showing them that setbacks are part of the process, that they're not alone, and that the team's strength lies not in avoiding problems, but in facing them together. And this isn't something that happens overnight. This is a culture shift. It's a mindset that you, as a leader, have to embody and reinforce day after day, project after project, setback after setback. Let's dig a bit deeper here. Think about any team that has achieved greatness. Any team, any organization that has really done something remarkable didn't get there by avoiding adversity. In fact, it's often the adversity that makes the team stronger. But that only happens if the team is equipped to handle it, if they know how to work together under pressure, if they have the skills, the mindset, and the resilience to keep going when things get tough. So how do we build that? How do we train a team to tackle adversity? First, we have to create a safe space for failure. That might sound counterintuitive, but stay with me. Adversity often involves failure. It involves setbacks. It involves moments where things don't go according to plan. And if your team is afraid of failure, if they're worried that a single misstep will reflect poorly on them, they're not going to be able to tackle adversity. They're going to avoid it. They're going to play it safe, take fewer risks, and stick to the status quo. But if they know that they can fail, that they can stumble, and that they won't be judged or reprimanded for it, they're going to be more willing to face adversity head on. They're going to be more willing to try new things, take calculated risks, and learn from their mistakes. And that's how resilience is built. But creating a safe space for failure doesn't mean accepting mediocrity. It doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means creating an environment where people can learn from their failures without fear of punishment. It means having conversations about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what can be done differently next time. It means reframing failure as an opportunity for growth rather than a mark against someone's record. Now, here's another key point: we need to teach our teams to ask for help. In a world that celebrates independence and self-reliance, asking for help can feel like a sign of weakness. But here's the truth: in the face of adversity, there is strength in unity. There is power in collaboration. And if your team doesn't know how to ask for help, if they're afraid to admit when they're struggling, they're going to burn out, they're going to feel isolated, overwhelmed, and eventually they're going to give up. So as leaders, we need to model vulnerability. We need to show our teams that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to say, I'm not sure how to handle this, because when we do that, we give them permission to do the same. And when someone does ask for help, we have to be there for them. We have to show up, we have to listen, we have to offer guidance, support, and when necessary, a helping hand. We have to be willing to roll up our sleeves and work alongside them. Because in a culture of genuine support, adversity is not faced alone. It's faced together as a team. And let's talk about perspective for a moment. One of the most powerful tools we can give our teams in the face of adversity is perspective. When a challenge feels overwhelming, it's often because we're too close to it. We're so wrapped up in the problem that we lose sight of the bigger picture. So as leaders, we need to help our teams zoom out. We need to remind them of the mission, of the long-term goals, and of the progress they've already made. We need to show them that this setback, while challenging, is just one chapter in a much larger story. It's a step along the journey, not the end of the road. And sometimes that shift in perspective is all it takes to turn adversity into opportunity. I want you to remember something: adversity doesn't have to be a negative experience. In fact, some of the greatest breakthroughs, some of the most powerful moments of growth come in the midst of adversity. But only if we're prepared for it, only if we know how to handle it, only if we're willing to face it with courage, resilience, and yes, optimism. Not blind optimism, not forced positivity, but a grounded, realistic optimism that says, this is hard, but we're going to get through it together. This is the heart of training a team to tackle adversity. It's not about pretending that everything is okay. It's not about putting on a brave face and pushing through. It's about building a culture where people feel safe to fail, supported when they need help, and empowered to face challenges head on. It's about creating an environment where adversity isn't something to be feared, but something to be embraced as an opportunity for growth. Because when we do that, when we train our teams to tackle adversity, we're not just preparing them for the next setback, we're preparing them for a lifetime of resilience, strength, and success. So let's get rid of the toxic positivity. Let's stop telling our teams to stay positive and start showing them how to stay resilient. Let's teach them to see challenges not as roadblocks, but as stepping stones. Let's show them that adversity, when faced together, can be the very thing that brings us closer, that strengthens our bonds. And that makes us better leaders, better teammates, and better people.